Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, April 20th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Thought I'd start you off with some low-level wind field here late in the afternoon on Thursday, just showing you the depth of the deep low that has taken a long time to move out of parts of Montana over here to the upper Midwest. We also have a larger ridge that's sitting over North Carolina, and this has allowed the temperatures to really kind of warm up this week. But on the back side of it, we have got, it's just some strong flow out of the south, and right into here is our frontal boundary. And it's on that frontal boundary that we're watching for the severe storms today. So just take a look at this particular setup. We have got a long region all the way from Texas clear up to Wisconsin, along which we are watching for strong storms. So this shading through here is all severe thunderstorm watch, and there's tornado watch here in parts of Illinois and getting into southern Wisconsin. If you notice, each one of these little polygons that are kind of highlighted here are either thunderstorm warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, or tornado warnings, depending on the color shading. We have strong winds out ahead and very strong winds back on the back side of this, and we've got some colder air that's coming in here. Then you notice along the north interior of the U.S., we have winter storm warnings out for the Red River Valley of the North, spreading into northern parts of Minnesota, something we're going to have to talk about here in a moment about the snow there. I'd like to show you this just a couple different ways. This is just the latest scans I've got as of Thursday afternoon on the position of those storms. We're going to continue to watch this whole area. Interestingly enough, we haven't yet broken this up into any sort of a squall line feature yet, indicating just how strong the shear is around these storms. They're staying discrete, even though I do notice several of the supercells raining into the ones to their north. Usually that's a good early signal that they're going to start to line out. Haven't quite fully realized that just yet. And again, this is the snow on the backside. So just walking you through the day again today from early this morning when the rain spread across Iowa and parts of Missouri into Illinois and Wisconsin. And then we saw the warm sector just reinvigorate today. Some sunshine got in there, and now the atmosphere is really just popping later in the day. I prefer to look at these things when you're doing a national scale like this, to actually go back to the satellite imagery. I love the fact that I have access to this kind of data. And it just shows, or we all have access to it, right? But it just shows us each one of these just massive storms and how the overshooting tops and the sheer size of them is just really well represented with our high resolution data. And we're going to have a rough night across this area as the storms continue to press on off to the east. From here, I want to show you what this system has done up to this point. Let's get an update here. There's the 4 o'clock data. Good. This is how much precip we've seen in the last 72 hours. And it is important to note that we've seen now 2 systems that have brought rain back to central parts of Kansas and east. And in a few moments, this whole area is going to be a major point of discussion in the near-term forecast. But this is just the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip. Remembering that this system did start in the Pacific Northwest. So look here along the Cascades, the Willamette Valley, I-5 corridor, and the Northern California. And what's come through here has largely been snow coming out of parts of Montana into southern Saskatchewan and over toward Manitoba. Now, I know it's not represented on this map, but this is an area that for the last 2 springs has started off the season in drought. So it's quite important to see the moisture coming into the southern Canadian prairie at this point. But this map stops at the 49th parallel, so we're looking at the last 72 hours of total accumulated snow through this morning. And again, some of these amounts here, well up over 18 inches of snow in parts of Montana. Some of the interior here, 2 to 5 inches of snow, and then right up here along the border getting into southern Saskatchewan, another pretty sizable round of snow in this area. Okay. I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that. For those of you that are going to get to watch this on Thursday night, I now want to just take a moment and go long range. I'll come back to this again at the end, but I'm just thinking about everything I showed you in the context of this map. Okay, I've been showing you the last 30 days at precip, but I'd like to show you the last 14. And the reason I'm doing this is because we've been drier in California, been dry in the Southwest. It's been quite wet in the Pacific Northwest and cold here. We've had a lot of wetness and snow coming out of Montana, but there are many places throughout the plains and Midwest that have been dry, while eastern Texas all the way up to the Carolinas have been quite wet. Go north of North Carolina into Virginia, though, we're back into drought again. And so we've really had a precipitation pattern here in this mid-spring time period that has been just split, right? We've just had some places that have received way too much rainfall and other places that have been very dry. And as I think about this and the fact that we have seen some moisture coming into Kansas, we want to ask, are we ever going to get into a pattern that can start to deliver more to this area? Because on this morning's drought monitor, this is what the newest data look like. And the changes, they've expanded the drought in this area on the latest drought monitor. Now we have a significant part of Kansas, more than half of it, that is in exceptional drought. And that includes, of course, you go south of there in Oklahoma and Texas and north into Nebraska. All right, that is not to diminish the drought that is in other places, like I mentioned, in Virginia and parts of the Mid-Atlantic, or what's going on in central Florida and the long-standing drought in central Oregon, or what still needs to be made up for in the Pacific Northwest. What I'm concerned about here is, can the pattern actually return moisture here? We saw today, though, some important new data released by our own Climate Prediction Center, and that's what I wanted to get to talking about here, because this is what their newest update is on the seasonal drought outlook. And this goes from April 20th to July 31st. And I've talked to several colleagues about this today. And again, I never will criticize our National Weather Service, our Climate Prediction Center, or NOAA. I am honored to be in a country with such incredible scientists that do such great work. So please understand that. I would have a contribution to the discussion. And my contribution might be that if you notice the color where it says drought persists, I'm not convinced that this nose in through here is going to stay as dry as advertised. I certainly would agree, if we were to just kind of draw this together, that this region has risk of maintaining its drought, but I think parts of central and eastern Kansas and Oklahoma are going to see a lot more thunderstorm activity going into May. And we need to know what that means, why that's the case, what atmospheric drivers are in place to do that, and if I have any confidence in it. So just a modification, that's all. You do notice that the models are attempting to, and the forecasters here are attempting to say that drought remains but improves in Nebraska and western Iowa. That's critical information as well. And in addition to this, they also released a new 1-month forecast for the month of May. I would agree with the National Weather Service that even though they release these maps, because they do, this is their job, that most of them will tell you that May is not settled. Even though we see that these are the places where there's chances of being warmer than normal or cooler than normal, there is evidence actually to support a highly volatile pattern through the month of May. Big thing is, I don't see a lot of blocking in the Pacific Jet or across the Atlantic. Secondarily, there is still cold water off the west coast, but it might be more indicative of setting up shortwave troughs that come over the Great Lakes, or the Rocky Mountains toward the Great Lakes. So I'm a bit confused by the drier forecast for Wisconsin and Michigan, although having been to both states recently, I know people here will be like, fine, let's have a drier go of it, especially if you can bring in some warmth. I know why they got the cooler here. I mean, we've seen cooler shots of air maintained over this snow-covered ground, and there's just evidence, model support plus MJO support, that suggests that's the case. But I want to add to this the new European model data. So let's go have a look at this. So this is the May outlook from the CPC. This was also released from the European model today for May precipitation. And there's a couple of things I have to call into question. Now remember, to be wetter than normal in California in the month of May does not mean a deluge of rain like we can get from December through March. To be wetter than normal in May, remember, May is mostly a drier month for California. But look at the wetter conditions in Washington and Oregon, or in Montana, in parts of the northern plains. And then the models have gone dry here. And I think what we're seeing in this simulation, in this area specifically, and possibly in the northern plains, is an initialization issue. You're going, what are you talking about? Okay. When the model was started today and run, it knew with better confidence that the next 15 days, let me show it to you, are going to look something like this. So you notice there's this large area that's drier in through here once the storms that rip through today, and the system that comes in next week that hits the southern plains goes through. And it's drier, but it's also colder. There's going to be a lot of colder air that's coming in behind this, which means this dryness is not necessarily just opening everything up for planting. We actually have, as you'll see later in the video, chances for frost during that time period. I do agree with the models showing the wetter conditions here, and I'll show why in a second, and also wetter along the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast. And now you know that there are places all throughout here that need this moisture. I'm specifically thinking about the Mid-Atlantic and Virginia. We're already plenty of moisture in this area, so we're not necessarily needing to grab a whole lot more. But I'm trying to explain why when you saw the European weekly forecast, let's go back to it here. Look at the 30-day precip anomalies and just stretch it out there, for the month of May, why it is advertising this particular setup. And then you can also make the same argument that it says this is what the temperatures are going to look like. Why cooler in the west? One, snowpack. Two, there's still colder water off the west coast. But what is a couple of degrees colder than normal? The blues make us think, our brains just say blue cold, it's going to be really cold. And that's not what we're saying here. And then, being a few degrees cooler than normal here, sure, we might start off early May with this, and certainly late April finishes this way. But I actually think there's more of a case that we're going to open up the warmth out of the Gulf of Mexico multiple times in May. And I think it's actually going to get back to a line like this. I think we could see the dry line position in the month of May getting all the way back to parts of western Kansas. Now, it's a bit of a bold strategy to tell you that we could be seeing more chances to return moisture to this part of Kansas and Oklahoma. And I know the saying, all signs fail in times of drought. And we've got these signals and signs right now, and I know that, I know the potential failures in this forecast. But I want to kind of make a point as to why I think that can happen. And here's the first point. The MJO, which is currently in phase 8, has been showing signs of popping out somewhere over here by Australia. And if it does come out in phase 3, 4, 5, or 6, or even, I'll be honest, even comes out in phase 2, if it does any of this over here, we just tend to set the atmosphere up to something more like this. And I can make a story out of this. And why I can do that, why it makes sense to me is with the colder water off the west coast, I could see more troughing here. No, I don't like this. This means that the chances of a hot May to build in the heat in the Pacific Northwest isn't necessarily there. It doesn't mean cold, but it doesn't mean hot. But if you bring troughs off the west coast and then go over the Rocky Mountains and there's a ridge over the southeast, this whole area goes. Now, that's normal May. And when you start to hear the chatter of a lot of the meteorologists looking at these things, those same ones that do a lot of storm chasing, of course, they're looking for the ideal setup. I'm not. I'm looking more for what the synoptic pattern could mean for agriculture, not storm chasing. But this is a ideal storm chasing pattern. Bad sides of it, like I said in the Pacific Northwest, the cooler conditions across the northern plains. Don't like seeing that. But overall, this could lead us to a very active May going forward. So does that buy in at all to this forecast from the CPC? Well, you start to see the warmth here, the equal chances, the cooler north, and maybe the slightly cooler here, but why would we be cool in the Pacific Northwest too? Warm in the Pacific Northwest. I think that would be cooler. I don't think that that's drier either. I also think that if I could redraw this, I'd make more of this whole area, everywhere east of these two arrows. I'm talking all of this has risk of a lot of spring thunderstorm activity. I don't think we're going to have trouble tapping into the Gulf. And if we build a big ridge right here in this area, then that would modify those graphics in those ways. So just a commentary on this. That's just my perspective. We then have to say, well, what happens after this time period? Because we've been watching our developing El Niño, and now notice all across the equatorial Pacific, we have got warmer than normal waters. See how we've kind of pinched off this cooler here on either side? Here's that cold water I mentioned that could set us up with those troughs. But I see this building El Niño, and we see the newest evidence here that those ocean temperatures in Niño 3.4 were a degree below average. That's a moderate strength La Niña back in January, and here we are now warmer than normal. This is a very fast progression, which means that the likelihood of this El Niño arriving soon is high, and we've even seen some better evidence. Let me go here, showing you what the significance of that is. The newest update from Columbia University, which works with the CPC, now has us at over an 83% chance of having El Niño by June, July, August. Now, why that matters, that was the little graphic I jumped over on you there. I went back and just looked after having a good conversation with some of my colleagues. I was talking to Arlen Suderman earlier today, and I said, for the last 3 years, June to September, so we're looking at all combined, June to September, 22, 21, and 20, we just continued to pour dry conditions into this section of the country. And that's a very common reaction to La Niña. We've had it for 3 years, and we've now busted that out. It's gone, and the forecast is to go to the opposite phase. So when I saw that, and we're just kind of putting this narrative together, I want to show you the newest long-range data from the Climate Prediction Center. Brand new, just released today. Ready? Let's go June, July, August precipitation. They've got a similar forecast to the one we've been kind of making an argument for. Lack of a southwestern monsoon. Potential risk, let me just draw this for you here. Potential risk of split flow in the west. And then northwest flow coming out of the Canadian Prairie. And maybe displaced a little bit to the south, but, you know, a big Bermuda high. So the moisture is here. The jet stream follows a trajectory like this with the subtropical component there. And it just points toward plenty of lift to get the atmosphere to be wet in this area. The risk of dryness here and dryness there. If you want an active southwest monsoon, you got to put a big ridge right here. And that's what we've had for 3 years now. And it doesn't look to be there this year. Where's the heat going to be? This is the temperature forecast. West Texas to the Pacific Northwest. Can you see the evidence of that northwest flow? Look at the near normal forecast in this area. Still has some similarities to the analog year we pulled out on Monday of 2009. But we can go beyond this. Let's go back to the precipitation, and I want to show you, whoops, sorry about that. Let's go back. There we go. I'd now like to show you what's next. So this would be July, August, September, the newest forecast from them. Still wet in that corridor. We then go, what about August, September, October? And this one is really quite interesting. Now let's just play a game with this, and let's say that it verifies. Some of the things I'll be thinking about here is, now are we talking about too much moisture in the central and eastern Corn Belt, the Mid-South, the Tennessee Valley, down to the Gulf Coast? Are we talking about a scenario possibly where tapping into the very warm conditions in the Gulf, if the Bermuda high is here, that we could initiate systems out of the Gulf? Now remember, this model isn't designed to initiate hurricanes, but we're just seeing the reflection of maybe where that big subtropical ridge is. Unfortunately, I think this means a hot, dry summer west. And what's interesting about it is you don't see any of these models trying to redevelop or strengthen drought in this area. And just as a reminder, last year, all of them did. So I also look at this and say, if we're going to be transporting this much moisture, do we now start to run the risk of the negative side of being too cloudy and too wet? Or maybe having some of the pest and disease pressures that can sometimes surface down here in the more tropical climates that we get in summer down here, although technically it's not tropical, but you know what I mean, that farther south, that starts to transport north. These are all things that are now on the table because I've seen this, all right? So I can reason it, I can make it work in my head. I'm just going to tell you that the one thing standing in the way of this right now, I think, is just that we still have some colder water here. So I'm concerned that if we don't see this fading over the next 45 days or so, that these forecasts I just showed you may not manifest themselves fully, as we just discussed. So that's it. That's kind of my new long-range outlook. That's my analysis of the CPC's new long-range outlook. All right. So why don't we come back to the near term here and talk about what we're dealing with, because we still have strong winds, severe storms, red flag warnings, and a blizzard not a blizzard, but a winter storm up north that probably feels like a blizzard to a lot of these people. Severe weather, this is for the rest of today in the day on Thursday, getting into Friday. This frontal boundary begins to break up. I'll show it to you, but we're going to be watching parts of the Carolinas nosing into the mid-Atlantic as we get into the day on Saturday here. The other side of this has got some snow on it, so let's just pick up with the high-res NAM. Let's start out here about 8 o'clock tonight. So notice that we're going to watch that frontal boundary move across Illinois, out of Wisconsin, getting over to Indiana, and then stretching down to Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas. So this whole corridor tonight is where we're watching for these strong to severe storms. On the northern side, strong winds and a lot of snow. Okay, we'll look at how much in just a second. This system moves east on Friday. Now you can see kind of why they took the severe weather threat out of this. It kind of loses the shear. It's unidirectional. And also the frontal boundary is a bit weaker and not pushing orthogonally to the wind shear vector. So the end result of that is that we don't run the same risk of severe weather here tomorrow and Friday as we are tonight on Thursday back here. There will be stronger storms along this. But as we go forward through Friday, front comes through, much colder air comes in on the back side of this, and we're going to watch as we go into the day on Saturday through about midday Saturday where the storms start to move through the mid-Atlantic. Now, love this. Okay, I know it's Saturday and that's going to ruin the Saturday for some, but we need the moisture in this area to come back into parts of Virginia. All right, after this, let's talk about the snow. This is what the European Model 12Z is pulling out for the next couple of days here through Monday. Remember, my color starts at 4 inches in blue. We could have the heavy snows right up here in this part of Ontario, Minnesota, really confined to this area near Lake Superior. Now, after this, I want you to watch the spine of the Rockies. Because as I play forward, you see that through Tuesday and Wednesday, look at this again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, snow coming right down here through the central Rockies. And you know that the number one thing we're looking for to return moisture to the plains is a cold trough of air in the upper levels of the atmosphere sitting right there. So thinking about that, this is the upper level height pattern. I have lots of different maps to show you these. I just chose this one today. Blues are troughs, ridges are in red. Okay. The trough I'm concerned about, that's the deep one that's bringing the colder farther to the east. The one I'm concerned about is right here. Watch this guy. It goes over the ridge in the west. There it slides through the northwest and sits up here by Monday, Tuesday. Now, that'll bring in a shot at precip in the northwest, which will then quickly be replaced with warmer conditions in the northwest and all along the west coast. But we put a trough of low pressure here, that will draw that moisture back to the west. And I want to show what it looks like by doing our comparison between the GFS and the European model. So, system number 1, we've seen it get all the way to the mid-Atlantic by the time we get to Saturday. Early Sunday morning, pulling rain through parts of the northeast. Still some snow showers on the backside. Very cold air funneling in through here. Now, already on Sunday morning, the chance of showers are in parts of New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma. But that's not the main event. As we play this forward, this is now Monday morning, Monday evening. We see that trough setting up in the upper levels over the Four Corners states. And I'll just play this forward for you. This is starting next Tuesday early in the morning through midday Tuesday into Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. And it'll even go all the way out to Thursday. There's the potential here in the plains. Watch it again. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday into Thursday, right there, of getting, possibly decent, not drought busting, but good moisture into this area. You then follow this and say, well, once you get out there past Tuesday into Wednesday, heavy rains over the south and southeast. It's in both models here. And then as we play it forward, that does move through the Carolinas later in the week. You notice that by next Thursday, the European model tosses another system in here as well. So what are the probabilities of getting an inch of rain in the next 10 days? We now see that in this corridor, those probabilities are 50 to almost 90% chance. And then you see over the southeast wet, New England wet. This is a very important forecast for this area. Like I said, it's not drought busting. I think I made this argument this morning. We are drier in this area since the start of this year, even going back all the way to last July, than we were in like 11, 12. We are drier in this area than we were in the 50s and even time periods throughout the Dust Bowl. But I want to know if it's going to keep going. Because as I mentioned, the eastern half of the country gets dropped into colder air while the west gets a warm-up. This is all the way out there to April 30th. What we see the models doing, and both the GFS and the European are doing this, is that in the beginning of May, we're attempting to go back to flow that looks something like this. This opens up mild conditions, which means we're going to start to melt whatever snow is left in through here. It'll start melting before this, but that's what's going to happen. And if this just sends little shortwaves over the Rockies, these shortwaves will be able to draw moisture back to the dry line. And if we are able to push it back a little bit farther to the west, we're going to light the plains up with severe weather, and they're all going to move off of those frontal boundaries over toward the Mississippi Valley. That's why I think we're going to have a very tumultuous May. Because to see this setup in May, where there's no like split flow out west and there's no big massive blocking ridges setting up that are at least being advertised by the models, it's going to be open and moving and it's going to be active. Now, this is all the way out to May 5th. When you look at the day 8 through 14 time period, which gets you out to May 4th, okay, we notice that with that colder air that's coming in, we're going to be drier here, but at the base of the trough, wetter. But with the ridge opening up west, drier here, and finally warmer in that area, okay? So let's go talk about these temperatures. We've already seen these on Thursday today. This is what Friday looks like, high temperatures, getting into Saturday and Sunday. So that's the cold we talked about. The ridge begins to open up in the Pacific Northwest after, remember there's a trough coming through early in the week, coming right down the spine of the Rockies. So we're going to see the warm up happening Tuesday into Wednesday, and this is where we're going to be setting up for the precipitation event that's going to be happening here in the southern and central plains of the United States. From here, with all the colder air that is coming in and staying central and east, we do note that over the next 7 days, there's going to be some places here that don't pick up any heat units, any GDDs. And we've really slowed the pace for a lot of other places. But what's good to discuss here is, with a volatile pattern, are we still seeing risk of frost getting pretty far to the south? So I showed you this morning. This is just the newest update from the model. And what we're doing again here is we're looking for this hard contour line. That's where you have subfreezing air into the blue colors. So I'd like to play out there to Friday morning just to see where that frost line is. Okay, let's go into Saturday morning. There it is. So getting Iowa to Nebraska to Colorado. Going into Sunday morning right here. Now we're clipping parts of Kansas and Missouri. As we go from Sunday into Monday morning there, clipping Illinois. And then going into Tuesday, when the new low begins to move, we push this into lower Michigan, along the Appalachian Mountains, Pennsylvania, New York, and pockets of Ohio. All right, so then the new system shows up, and I'm just going to play the temperatures quickly here because we have some more mild air that's going to try to work its way in. When I say more mild, I don't mean warm. I just mean less cold. But then behind that system, let's just take it out there to next Sunday morning. We're going to watch for another shot at some cooler air coming through. But by this point in April, it's challenging to get a frost down pretty far to the south here. What are the temperatures doing overall? This is the next 5 days. It's a 5-day sliding window. So as I let this slide all the way out there today, 5 through 10, which gets us out there to the 25th through the 30th. That's when the ridge opens up the warmth, the colder air drops east, and then we start to see some moderation as we finish April and start May. Now what I'm saying is I think that once we get past the first few days of May, this all opens back up with warmth. And I think it's going to do it to the tune of strong to severe storms in this area. All right. Last thing to cover for you tonight, South America. We do see that they're drier right now in southern and central Brazil. This is an area that was very wet recently. We still see the drier signal in Argentina, which has been ongoing, but wetter conditions over the next 15 days in Mato Grosso to Goiás. Remember, most of our safrinha corn is right here in this state. Don't see any major issue with this safrinha crop right now. Remember that when you start May's precipitation on average for Brazil is less than half of what April typically is. So we've got a few things to be watching in South America, but one of the things is not worried about the size of the safrinha corn crop. I think it'll be large. Okay, I'll stop there. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.